Hello, and welcome to Powerful Places Podcasts. I'm your host, Gary White, and today we will hear an interview I had with Freddy Silva while on the trail of the Knights Templar in Portugal.
Hi, I'm Ellen Aviva.
And I'm Gary White.
And I'm here to talk with Gary very briefly about the interview he just finished with Freddy Silva, renowned crop circle expert on sacred sites, Egypt, and his new book and his most recent research on the Templars, the Knights Templar in Portugal.
And we were just traveling with Freddy to some of these sites that he has described in the book called First Templar Nation.
Yes, we did Freddy has started leading boutique tours we were with a group of 6 plus Freddy, so you get a lot of attention and have a very personal experience. It was quite interesting, and we saw some just really amazing places.
We went to Tomar.
Oh yes, with its castle, Templar castle on the hilltop with its rotunda that had no door originally.
Which is interesting.
Yes, and all kinds of esoteric symbolism.
And then the strange town of Monsanto, which is built amongst the rock field of huge granite boulders.
Oh, it's immense. So the wall of a building might be a boulder, or the roof, or part of the floor. And on top of the mountain behind it, or it's on the side of this hill, is another important Templar site with a huge boulder inside.
With a cave under this boulder of some sort.
Very, very strange, very ancient sacred site.
And then we ended up in Centra.
Oh, which is a fairy tale.
Which is an amazing place. Yeah. 3 castles, palaces, temples, whatever, on top of this hill, above a town.
Sintra Mountain.
Yeah.
Yeah, with extensive gardens. Some of this is 19th century follies, grotesque things, pseudo-Moorish, initiatic. It appears that this is related to the Templars, again, of course.
And the summer palace of the king of Portugal.
Long deposed.
Long deposed.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So, very interesting places. And Gary took the opportunity to interview Freddy in front of a ruined dolmen in the garden outside of the Palace d'Opena, and that will follow now.
So, on with Freddy.
On with Freddy.
Well, I'm sitting here today with Freddy Silva above Sintra, Portugal, in the woods behind Pena Castle. And we have been looking at Templar sites. Now, I've always assumed that the Templars were in Jerusalem, in the Holy Land, in France. Mm-hmm. What were they doing here in Portugal?
That's exactly what I asked myself, and it's a very good point, because most people associate the Templars with the Crusaders. Not quite the same thing. The two are very, very different people, even though the members of the future Templars did go there at the same time as the Crusades. The story is actually very intricate. It's an intricate web of family connections, business connections, religious connections, and it really dates back to the time when Godfrey de Bouillon, who became the first king of Jerusalem, once the city has been completely rid of all the Arabs, they established their positions as military people do, and then he does something very strange. He walks outside the city gates, still roaming around with Arabs, quite annoyed because they just lost their strong point, and he does something very silly for a military man. He goes outside the gates, goes to the ruins of the Basilica on Mount Sion, where there used to be many, many temples, including one of the Essenes. And he sets up this mysterious order of monks and cavaliers called the Order of Notre Dame of Sion, otherwise known as the Order of Sion. Real organization, and it really is central to understanding of how the Templars came to be involved here in Portugal, because one of the first count of the county of Portugal, which is the predecessor of Portugal, tiny little county in the north of here, he sails to Jerusalem twice, and on one of his trips he takes a young man with him called Pierre Arnauld de la Roche, otherwise known to the locals here as Arnaldo de Rocha, who then appears about a decade later as the head or the prior of the Order of Sion. Now, he's the central culprit in this story of how the Templars ended up in Portugal, because we have documents now showing that he, along with 4 other Templar preceptors, are ordered by the then Grand Master Hugh de Payan to travel back to Portugal in 1125 to establish, and I quote, a Portuguese crown. So we have here, at the very, very early stages in Jerusalem, the players in the story of Portugal, as it would become, the central characters that would form the nucleus of the Knights Templar in Jerusalem, and the knights who were ordered by the Grand Master to come from Jerusalem to this little county to establish a kingdom within a kingdom accountable only to God.
So the Portuguese kingdom was established by the Templars.
Absolutely. And we have it right from the horse's mouth that the Hugh de Payan himself did actually order 4 preceptors, Templar preceptors, to go from Jerusalem. One is the head of the Order of Sion as well, to boot. And they basically landed north of here, and they already had contacts within the city of Braga. And from those contacts and through their Burgundian connections in the country, they began to establish preceptories. They were given properties, land, homes to live in, and slowly you see this intricate web of relationships starting to pay dividends after 2 decades. And before you know it, they've got title deeds here, and they're acquiring more property in the county of Portugal long before they did in France.
So we have always thought that, and were told that the Templars were in Jerusalem to protect pilgrims who were going to Jerusalem, and that seems to have nothing to do with Portugal.
Absolutely nothing. It's something that just hasn't been written in history. It's been completely forgotten. It's marginalized. It's something that is a footnote in history. But the documentation is all there, and of course we know now today that the entire concept of 9 nights patrolling 33 miles
seems a little ludicrous, actually.
Jaffa to Jerusalem. I mean, that's a superhuman feat. Apart from the fact that there is proof and evidence that the Knights Hospitallers were already policing the roads by themselves. In fact, there's not even a shred of evidence that shows the original core of the Knights Templar did any fighting at all. There were 2 brotherhoods, an outer brotherhood who took care of temporal matters, such as fighting, as you had to do. Even monks had to take up a sword once in a while. And then there was the inner brotherhood who did, they looked like they were being guided by a ministerial college. They were doing things of a very spiritual nature. And we find the same thing here as well.
So they must have had some intent and purpose, which was not the external intent of protecting pilgrims. What was that?
Well, the idea for that really has to do with the benefactor of the Templars, who was the monk Bernard of Clairvaux. He's the highest member of the Cistercian order in France, and if you start reading his letters and his credo, you begin to get a sense that this guy was looking all the way from the beginning to create a kingdom of conscience, separate from the Catholic Church.
A kingdom of conscience.
Accountable only to God, to nobody but God.
I see.
And almost in a non-religious or early Celtic Christian sense. And when you start looking at the heritage of the original, not 9 nights, but 11 nights, there were actually 11 if we look carefully at some of the transcripts. So even there we have a problem with history. It's quite clear that most of the Templars were actually handpicked by Bernard of Clairvaux, and they were Cistercian monks, 2 of whom were actually Portuguese.
Aha.
That changes things considerably.
So Portugal was going to be the center of this kingdom of conscience.
Oh, even better than that. When the young prince of Portugal was aided by Bernard of Clairvaux, I have a document that also states quite clearly that the Templars, after his father died, always came to his aid and didn't stop doing it until he was king and long after. So his father, who'd gone to Jerusalem, obviously made some good connections. When he died abruptly in 1113, the young prince was only 8 years of age, and the Templars supported him, make sure that he was brought up in the Templar tradition, and by the time that he grows up to be crowned a knight at 16 years of age, kids had to grow up very quickly back then, he's actually crowned as a Knight Templar as well. And they helped him essentially establish a stronghold against the Spanish, who were then trying to rule the country. So what we then find is that Afonso, the king, slowly takes the country away from the Spanish and from the Moors, who are ruling his piece of land. And then, once he's established all the land all the way down to the River Tejo, he then does an incredible thing. He gives away a third of his territory to the Knights Templar. And that's this big story here, because it was a long, patient plan, waiting 40 years for these things to happen. And once they had that title deed, they took up 1/3 of the country, and the center of which was the town of Tumar, where their most important monuments are to this day. That was the center of their kingdom of conscience.
And we visited this little town, which is quite an interesting little town.
Oh, it's surreal.
Yes. And that's the end of part 1. Stay tuned for part 2, and also go to www.powerfulplaces.info for more information.